Chuck Schumer went on the Senate floor and basically said that Bibi Netanyahu has got to go because he is an obstacle to peace. And there were some complaints that a senator was weighing in on this. I mean, frankly, my complaint is I think it was probably let a little air out of the tire in the growing frustration with the Israeli government, period, and focusing it on a fall guy, Bibi Netanyahu. I do think it's possible that some of Israeli policy would change if Netanyahu was out of the picture, but I also think it's very likely that it wouldn't. One doesn't know. Maybe there are U.S. officials who are hearing from military personnel. We know Benny Gantz was in town, who is ostensibly a potential opposition leader, ostensible. And the White House met with him and supposedly really took him to task. Lambasted at White House about Gaza war strategy. That also seemed a very little weird to me at the time, and it seems even a little weirder now, as if it was like, hey, when you leave here, we're going to say that we really roughed you up. But what we're really talking about is how do we get rid of Netanyahu? Who knows? The bottom line is we know the leverage the U.S. government has with the Israelis, and they have yet to use it. Here is Bibi Netanyahu on with Dana Bash. Dana Bash, incidentally, just to remind you, I think it was Pramila Jayapal who was on months ago, interviewed by Dana Bash, saying that it is horrific what was happening in terms of the Israelis killing civilians. And Dana Bash's only response was, well, at least they're not raping people, which is a very odd response to that. But here is this interview.
Let's talk about what happened here in the U.S. this week. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer gave a pivotal speech and said, you have lost your way, and called you an obstacle to peace. Take a listen.
The Netanyahu coalition no longer fits the needs of Israel after October 7th. And I believe that holding a new election, once the war starts to wind down, would give Israelis an opportunity to express their vision for the post-war future.
Chuck Schumer is the highest-ranking Jewish elected official here in America, a staunch supporter of Israel. What's your response?
I think what he said is totally inappropriate. It's inappropriate for to go to a sister democracy and try to replace the elected leadership there. That's something that the Israeli public does on its own, and we're not a banana republic. I think the only government that we should be working on to bring down now is the terrorist tyranny in Gaza, the Hamas tyranny that murdered over 1,000 Israelis, including some dozens of Americans, and is holding Americans and Israelis hostage. That's what we should be focused on. And as far as what Senator Schumer said, the majority of Israelis support our governments. 82% of Americans support Israel instead of Hamas, but the majority of Israelis support the policies that we're leading. Go into Rafah, destroy the remaining Hamas terrorist battalions, make sure that we don't put into Gaza, instead of Hamas, the Palestinian Authority that educates their children towards terrorism and the annihilation of Israel. And also an enormous majority here, including 99 Knesset members to 9, oppose the idea of ramming down a Palestinian state down our throats.
I want to get to some of those polls.
The majority of Israelis, this is a wake-up call to Senator Schumer. The majority of Israelis support the policies of my government. It's not a fringe government. It represents the policies supported by the majority of the people. If Senator Schumer opposes these policies, he's not opposing me. He's opposing the people of Israel.
That's actually 100% true.
Yeah, it's interesting to agree with Netanyahu on this, but there is also a way in which we can simply, not get involved in the messy issue of whether a U.S. senator should try and influence the politics of another country. And let's be honest. We know for a fact that Bibi Netanyahu's has tried to influence the politics in this country. But putting that aside, that is why the best thing that the United States can do, and really the one with the most integrity, is to leverage their aid to Israel, or simply withhold it and say, what are we going to get for our money? If you have a problem with and that's why I was always like a little bit, I mean, look, clearly there is problems within the Democratic caucus that Schumer has to respond to this. Chuck Schumer is not getting out ahead of the Democratic caucus in the Senate ever on anything. He does not, I mean, he doesn't even lead from behind necessarily. He really just in any way, in any way that, like, I don't know, you would tell your concierge at a hotel, like, lead from behind and get me tickets to, the O or whatever's playing at the Civic Center, whatever it is. Chuck Schumer's doing this because there's a lot of pressure in the Senate. He realizes that it's also impacting electoral chances for the president and senators, and they're trying to let a little air out of the tires.
Yeah, that's what the uncommitted vote did, and that's why it was so genius and put together so well with not a lot of money behind it. It was that you made this an electoral issue. Like, no, in my lifetime, there's never been an electoral consequence for being pro-Israel. and that's, I think, what Biden thought. He thought that we were still in that era, and the conditions on the ground rapidly changed those kinds that situation. But I mean, yeah, Netanyahu's actually 100% right there. He's deeply unpopular, but I mean, it's such a fanciful notion that the Democrats now are coalescing behind, that essentially if Gallant or if Benny Gantz or any of these other folks take over the Israeli government, that they're going to be less genocidal in one way. I mean,
that we have to look toward their elections.
I agree, though, that getting Netanyahu out would benefit things, because in theory, whoever the United States supports would have to be a little bit more responsive, and there wouldn't be this existential thing where Netanyahu is extremely fearful that if the war ends, that he's going to go to frickin' jail. So that does lead him. That I do agree that getting Netanyahu out would hopefully alleviate some things, but he's 100% right that the Israeli public is overwhelmingly behind this genocide, and that's because it's not a democracy. It's because it's an ethno-state where we live in a one-state reality right now where millions of Palestinians are ruled over by the Israelis, and they don't have a say in that. So if there were to be a demographic change and the Arabs were able to determine their own future in the within the boundaries of what is controlled by Israel, then it would be a very different reality. And that is why Israel is so fearful and acting with the urgency of a state that wants to eliminate a population so they can be the only democracy where only Jews have the ability to
And to be clear,
vote.
Chuck Schumer also said after the war is over. And when in that that's after the war is over, there need to be elections to get rid of Netanyahu ostensibly, but Netanyahu's plan is to not have the war over.
Yep.
I mean, he obviously can't do this for the rest of his life, but he probably figures his best bet is to extend it as long as humanly possible, so that notion of changing horses midstream, he wants to linger midstream as long as he can.
Yep.
And the idea of going into Rafah extends that. I mean, I think probably the worst thing that's happened to Netanyahu has been the restraint that Hezbollah and Hezbollah is, to be fair, is also, it's obviously sending rockets across northern Israel, but is
only at face-saving levels.
But at face-saving levels. I mean, every expert who has looked at this has said, that the restraint exercised by Hezbollah and Iran is undeniable, and that's bumming Netanyahu out.
Oh, no. Well, I also saw this over the weekend that I didn't even realize, that the Knesset breaks in early April. So it's a big part of why this is, this is part of the date that's being circled on the calendar for Netanyahu, because then there wouldn't be enough time to mobilize for early elections. So the recess, I believe, starts April 9th. I saw Yair Wallach, who's a professor of Israel, tweeted that over the weekend. So, like, meanwhile, hostages, who he clearly does not care about them at all, and people in Gaza are starving to death. But he's biding time until that April date, where they wouldn't have the opportunity to mobilize for new elections and they could keep up this war cabinet.